In part one of the interview featuring Jay Trombley, we talked about preparation, the training, the mindset, and the groundwork that was laid long before anything ever happened. In this episode, we move into the moment itself. Today, we walk through June 22nd of 2025, what unfolded in real time, the decisions that had to be made in seconds, and how Jay, safety officer at Crosspointe Church, responded under pressure and played a critical role in saving lives. This is the incident, step by step. Welcome to Sanctuary Peacemakers. This is your frontline guide to safety and security inside houses of worship with your host, Unity. Now, let's enter the crucible of our discussion. All right, so now, Jay, I want to move into that specific day, and this is, let me put this out there, this is not to sensationalize what happened that day, but to help others understand what it's really like to face that moment that nobody ever truly wants to face. Can you take us back to the day of the incident, what started as a normal day, and when did things start to feel off?
So it was, things were a little bit different on that Sunday. We had VBS the prior week.
Right.
And with our week-long VBS program, the kids are learning songs and dances and all that stuff. And so on the following Sunday, everybody's invited back to the kids get to perform 3 or 4 of their songs. Our praise and worship band gets the weekend off.
Right.
And the kids get to do their songs and the dances they learned and the motions and the stuff. The stage is usually still decorated in the theme of the VBS theme, and it's a fun Sunday.
Yeah.
You end up with a lot of people who wouldn't normally be at your building.
Yeah.
Grandparents that don't attend the church, or aunts and uncles, and
even a lot of times people in the
community.
Yeah.
That there's people that their church, they might go to a small church that doesn't do a VBS,
right.
So their kids come. So, a lot of unfamiliar faces in the building that day, or ones you see once a year or so.
Yeah, we get a bunch from this because right on the other side of the fence, I'm sure you notice, is that whole big apartment complex, and we get kids in from there that don't normally come, that their parents never come, but they'll come out for VBS.
Yep. So, what was it, vacation babysitting? So that was a different Sunday for us.
Right.
So it was, it was fun, a lot of people, and the kids had just got done and were just coming off the stage when the first indication was when we heard the first burst of gunfire.
Did you know what it was right away? When you heard it, did you know immediately that it was gunfire? Not before you you were inside, correct? And you were.
I was in. So you come out of our lobby and kind of go. There's a hallway. To your left is the sanctuary. To your right is our cry room.
Right.
Glass on either side of the hallway.
Yeah.
Knee wall, 2 or 3, 4 foot high. The sanctuary has 3 openings from that to go in, no doors. in the center of that hallway would be the center line of the sanctuary, I guess. There are double doors that go into the cry room. You can also enter the cry room out of the lobby.
Right.
I was standing in front of those doors looking into the sanctuary. And actually my son-in-law, who's on the safety team, was standing next to me.
Right.
And we were chatting a little bit. And I heard that noise. My initial thought was a pipe hammering. Now, I said earlier that I'm on the Ironman crew, which is our group of guys that we do the maintenance on the building.
Right.
The noise came from my left, and so it was kind of like a pipe hammering, and I turned because all of the utilities are that direction,
Right.
from where the noise came, and but as I turned, I could see through the glass, I could see a young lady running. And I just grabbed that door behind me and opened it up and asked, what was that? And I could also see her husband was standing up. There, and there were two little ones. And he was part of the safety team also, he wasn't on that day. But I see them moving away from, there's a closet in there that has some duct work and stuff. So my brain real quick was, problems of utility, havoc. It was hotter than hot that day. And I opened the door and said, what was that? And I remember her saying AR-15. I don't remember everything she said, but I remember the AR-15 part.
Which was probably the most important part.
Right. So, at that time I was, I think I was reacting and heading towards the door back into the lobby. That's when Carol, the woman I was referring to a little while before that, came through that door, and I don't remember that interaction, but so it was an immediate. There was no, it was. We hear the noise. Within seconds, I'm told it's a guy with a gun.
Right.
And so I knew from what Carol had told me exactly where he was. So I was able to run right out in the lobby and go to those front doors.
Right. So when did you first see the assailant? Like what drew your attention? You knew where he was, but what actually caused your focus to shift specifically to him?
So initially, as I go to the doors, the front doors there don't get used. They're the front door of the church, but they're just about as far away from the parking lot as you can get. They don't even get unlocked.
Right.
And it's all grass. There's a sidewalk coming from the west, and then there's a sidewalk that runs directly north out to Glenwood.
Okay.
As I come out, there is a truck, a pickup truck, right there.
Yeah.
And it looks to be smoking or something. And then I look down and there's a...
Was that your usher that had run him over, or was
deacon. He was a deacon. Yeah. At this time, I don't know any of that.
Right, right.
There's a truck on the front lawn, and then I notice this man on the ground, sitting on the ground, sitting up. I looked around, I opened the door, but had the mindset to hold on to the door, because if it was shut, it would have been locked.
And you would have been outside.
Right.
Right.
As I had entered the sanctuary, well, even before I came out of that hallway, I had my weapon drawn. And I was standing outside the door with my weapon drawn, looking at this fella, the back of him.
Right.
I was still, evidently my brain was still trying to process what was going on.
Yeah.
At that time, there had been one burst of gunfire. This man was in like camo tactical gear. Don't know at the time. I did at one point look out into the front yard and could see someone in the front. I recognized who it was, and then I went like, okay, that's his pickup. That's Richard's pickup.
Right.
The burst of gunfire that we had heard had been fired into the front of that truck.
Right.
And that's the reason the truck had stopped there and was smoking. My brain evidently was processing and trying to decide what to do.
Right.
At some point, it told me to go back in the building. I turned and headed back in the building, and at that time, while I was doing that, another safety team member who had been sitting pretty much right on the aisle, center aisle, halfway up, had come out into the lobby, drew his weapon as he was crossing the lobby, had stopped inside the lobby just about where there's glass doors, glass panels either side. So he was looking at what was out there.
Right.
He was looking, assessing
Kind of what was.
what was going on, trying to decide who this guy was, good guy, bad guy, because he almost had the SWAT look. It was
Kind of like the same thing you were.
Yeah, so I don't know that I was thinking that. I was still
Right.
just trying to, but somehow something told me to turn and head back in. And as I turned and headed in the door, he swung around with his rifle and shot through those two panes of glass. Down low, up high, he kind of strafed through. I don't know if he went low and then back up, but there's shots down low through tablecloths. There's holes in the ceiling down the hall. There's impacts on the wall here. There's impacts on the wall. You know, there was a lot of impacts, high and low, through that, from that burst.
Was his rifle semi-automatic or was it automatic? Did he have
believe
some
it
sort of
from-
like bump stock or?
I believe it was, somebody told me they've read the report, is that it was an automatic weapon. So as he swung through and fired, I was getting away from the doors. I didn't realize I had ran as far as I did until I saw the security footage. But as I was coming through the doors and he fired, our other safety team member who was standing there was hit in the leg.
That was the one individual that got hit.
Yes.
Outside of the suspect.
Yes, he was the only church member that was injured.
Right.
He spun around and hit the ground and managed to get himself partially into the hallway, but he still had a visual
Right.
on the suspect. I came back around, and I had in my brain, I remember seeing the individual shooting to the west. I remember looking through the window and seeing him silhouetted against the pickup truck firing west. It wasn't until recently discussing with other people that I had the time frame of when that happened.
Right.
He was actually firing at another safety team member who had come out around the west end of the building. He was not on that day, but asked if we wanted extra help, and I said yes, and he was actually, had just mic'd up and was getting himself a cup of coffee on the west end of the building. And he heard the initial gunfire that went into the pickup, came around, and as he was coming down the front of the building was when he fired, the gunman fired into the lobby at Ron and myself.
Yeah.
My son-in-law had just made it through If you watch the video, I come out, Ron came out, and then my son-in-law, you can see him running through with a phone in his hand,
Yeah.
and evidently a pocket knife too, because he wasn't armed at the time. And he had just made it down that hallway before the gunshots came into the lobby. After he fired into the lobby, the other safety team member that was coming down the front of the building engaged him. And that's when he fired back at him down the front of the building,
Yeah.
which resulted in all the damage to the building
Right.
that everybody saw in the news. And then he took cover. Well, he had fired at him and then took cover behind an AC unit, and that's when the man fired back. And that's about the time that I came back around to the windows and engaged him.
Right.
And then the whole thing was, I don't know that it was a minute.
Yeah.
It happened that fast. It was over.
So while all this was going on, what was going through your mind, and do you remember it? Is it sharp memory or is it more of a blur? It sounds like you have memories of certain aspects very clearly, but other parts surrounding the main event, so to speak, are a little more blurry. Is that accurate?
Well, some of it I know because I've watched the security footage of it.
Mm-hmm.
Other pieces are visuals that I've had to piece together in conversations with other people,
Right.
the timelines.
Right.
So, two thoughts. I remember thinking two things through that. As I could see the end of his barrel and he was shooting into the lobby, I remember thinking I was going to die, or could die.
Right.
Because like I said, the glass was shattering, I could see the muzzle flash,
Yeah.
and I knew he was firing at me and whoever else was in there. As I turned from my retreat and came back along the door, and evidently at that time he was firing the other direction, and I was engaging him. I remember as I was engaging him, I thought, poop, this is happening to us. I don't think poop was the word, but I vividly remember thinking, this is happening to us.
Yeah.
And then it was done. I don't know how many rounds I fired. I know it wasn't a full magazine. And I stopped, evidently assumed that he was down, and then went out, I turned to check on Ron. He was hit, but he was still he was on his elbow, but he still had his firearm, and he still had both hands on it, and had an eye on the guy.
Yeah.
And I then went out the doors and cleared his rifle from him, got it away from him, and then
Now, had he expired at that time, or?
I don't believe so. I don't.
But he had obviously been hit enough times
He had
too.
been, yeah.
He had been taken out of the.
He was,
out of the
I believe
picture.
he was out of the fight, yeah.
Right.
Because his rifle was laying across his chest.
Right.
And I, very cautiously got up there and got the rifle from him, put it on the other side of the sidewalk. And as I started to study him was when, I don't remember him coming down, but the other gentleman who was behind the AC unit came down, and as I was watching him and looking, that's when I realized he had a sidearm too. And I don't remember if we had a discussion, but the other team member knew I was going down to get the sidearm, and he put a foot over him. He didn't put a foot on him, but he put a foot over him in case he moved, so that he could put him down. And I was able to, it took me a minute to figure out how to get, it took me a little bit to figure out how to get his sidearm out of his holster. And then I removed it from him. While this was happening, people were coming to attend to Ron, who had been hit. Everyone had headed out the east side of the building into what we call the orchard, the large field yard on the east side.
Is that
of the
where all the
building.
deer always are?
Yep.
Okay.
And some of them, they were running right clear out into the woods heading for the Rouge River. Guys were, I was told that some of the women that didn't move so well of many birthdays were, picked up and carried. But one of our safety team members, who would have been sitting to my right in the back corner of the cry room, young ones, he's got young kids, he got up as people started headed out the east side. We're heading for the east side of the building to evacuate. Drew his firearm, went out, cleared the area on the east side of the building to make sure there was, to check to see if there was anybody there.
A second shooter or something.
So he cleared that area, evidently was confident, and then he came back in, or came out the front of the building to where we were, and maintained cover until law enforcement showed up with us. Several other young men and other people showed up to help work with Ron, who had been hit, and get him taken care of. And then we turned around and there was police there immediately. There had been 2 phone calls to 911 made as the man was getting out of his vehicle. He was spotted getting out of his vehicle with the rifle. So
is that what made, I forget his name, the one with the truck,
Richard
decide to put his foot on the gas pedal?
So
basically?
he was, from what I understand, he was the man came in, drove into the parking lot very fast from the street. From what I understand, tried to do a couple donuts in the back of the parking lot, open area of the parking lot, and pulled up and got out of his vehicle on the west end of the building. And what I understand, got out of his front seat holding the rifle, but then set it on the ground, put a vest on, and put on sound savers, and then picked his firearm back up, his rifle.
So in other words, it was clear what his intent was right from the jump.
Richard, from what I understand, was out of his vehicle, seen this happening, actually called out to the guy, and he ignored him. He just looked at him and then proceeded to walk down the front of the building. And so Richard knew he had to do something, and he had, and he knew the only thing he could do. So by the time he got in his truck and headed down the sidewalk after him, I don't know where the point of impact where he hit him, but evidently he didn't hear him coming because he had sound savers on. And he was, I assume, hit from the back. The hood of the truck was damaged. He was hit hard enough that the hood of the truck was damaged. But he landed in front of those 2 glass panels to the west of our front door.
What emotions do you recall having? You had mentioned a bit of fear, like I don't know if it was necessarily fear, but I'm gonna die type thought. What about adrenaline or focus or calm? Like what stood out most for you?
I remember being, pretty tense, what happened. I do remember, I don't know how many minutes later it was, trying to help the law enforcement get into our security cameras. I couldn't even hardly get the door unlocked to get the door open to where our monitor was.
Right.
And then trying to punch in the password to get in, I was having issues with that,
Yeah.
So I was pretty hyped up on adrenaline, and disbelief, I think.
Yeah.
And then just trying to figure out what's going on. I remember running to the sanctuary to see what's going on there. I remember running outside to find my family. I remember, and I can't, my phone starts ringing. I'm getting calls because the other fellow who's, leads with me wasn't there.
Right.
But his son texted him right away, shooting at church. And that was all he's texted him, One of our past church leaders, good friend, he heard about it. He's at a church in Canton. He heard about it immediately. He's on the phone to me.
Yeah.
And
I was surprised at how quickly the news of it spread. Like we heard about it over here, like almost immediately, within just, I don't, almost immediately, like I said. And we weren't sure at that time because we were getting very limited information. So we weren't sure if it was like a coordinated thing or an isolated thing because, we had just had all those threats coming out of Dearborn. And we're like, well, is this a Dearborn attack? So we went on to a soft lockdown, double checking all the doors, making sure everything was locked down and, careful about who we let in and out. So the news of that happening spread a lot faster than I've seen a lot of other news spread.
well, the night before there was the action overseas. And I remember watching the news that morning and the news actually said that, because of the action overseas, they thought that the threat could
spill over.
Yeah. Onto our soil, radical groups or whatever.
Right.
And that, I do remember thinking that is that part of this?
So is that actually went through your mind?
Somewhere along the line in there, I don't know immediately, but
Right.
until we didn't know why anything had happened.
Yeah.
It was not until later that night that we were starting to find out.
Started getting the information.
Started getting any information. Yeah.
During the incident, when you were actually taking the shots, returning fire, were you able to assess like your angles, your backdrop, like what was going on, potential risks to others? Like, were you able, or was it more of a, again, kind of muscle memory? I just knew I had to end this person at pretty much all costs.
I don't know if I thought. I knew I was at close range and I was firing down. So backdrop wasn't
really an issue.
Wasn't really an issue, but I don't know that I would have taken that into consideration.
Right.
I knew this was
Such an emergency.
This was, right now, I, literally don't know, I knew I wasn't hit. I didn't think I was hit.
Yeah.
I don't know that I ever thought I was hit. But, this was mere seconds after the bullets were going past me.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I thought much about anything at the time.
Right.
Besides taking that shot.
So I'm guessing that you didn't have, like, at least in the moment, you didn't have a lot of internal conflict between, possibly ending a life versus, and desire.
No, that I don't.
Anything.
None of that was there. It was just I knew, like I said, when I was holding that door and looking, I was still trying to figure out. But when the shots were coming at me, it was, there was no doubt in my mind that this threat had to be taken care of because he was there to hurt people.
Right. Now, you briefly touched upon this. What kind of interaction did you have with the responding law enforcement at the scene, and did they treat you as a suspect at first, or just as like part of the response?
So, what I'm assuming happened, I haven't read the report. I don't know how in-depth reports get, but I know that there was 2 calls made beforehand.
Right.
Law enforcement was on their way before the gunfight actually happened. As the 3 of us, the 2 of us that had actually engaged in the gunfight, the 3rd safety team member who had come from inside, were just kind of there covering him.
Yeah.
The law enforcement came around the front of the building. Big guy was standing here, I'm standing here. The other team member who engaged him was right here. Well, we had been to a Protect Your House of Worship class 3 days beforehand. And one of the things, one of the things that had been reemphasized was, identifying yourself to law enforcement if there's an incident.
Right.
And the fellow who was standing to my right had his security badge and was covering him, but he was holding it like this.
Right.
Not that I think they would have been able to read that as they were running up from around the building.
But the fact that he was holding it kind of gave implication.
I'm also under the impression that they were getting a play-by-play of what was happening, 911.
Right.
I believe.
So somebody probably still stayed on the phone with them.
I get the impression that my son-in-law, who had, just made it through the lobby before the gunfire.
Right.
I believe he was on and given the play-by-play that the man was down and that our security team was covering him in the front yard. Right. So I'm guessing that they already had that information.
So they kind of had a better idea of what they were walking
Because
into.
I was surprised that they ran right past us while we still had weapons on the man and went right to him.
Right.
And it's in a security video that I watched that I can see I finally said something and we all came back to the ready and then holstered.
Right.
But yeah, they had just ran past us and didn't say anything to us.
So how long, and this may not have, this probably hasn't even fully happened, but how long did it take for you to emotionally process, at the very least, not get over, but process what happened that day, like to really come to terms with it, I guess?
You know what? I don't think I fully answered your last question.
Okay.
So let me go back to that. So law enforcement treated us fantastic.
Good.
They were great to us. They, unfortunately, some of the reports they had of a silver vehicle, a man with a silver vehicle. It also happened that the fellow that hit him with a truck had a silver vehicle. So unfortunately, Richard got handcuffed in the front yard
Oh, jeez.
and brought in the building. And at one point, I came up the hallway and saw Richard in handcuffs and kind of lost it, yelling at the cops, you know. And I was, you know, told to sit down and you know, relax for a minute. And it wasn't very long before they got that straightened out.
Right.
But he was very shook up because he had, you know, he had seen all this, and he had, you know, a rainbow of round holes through the windshield of his pickup where he was sitting. You know, so he had just gone through a burst of automatic fire, had just, you know, filled his truck while he was in it. But they were super to us. They were, we got him into the security cameras. We have a 16 monitor system, and I'm telling them, okay, look at this one and this one and this one, and I was saying this and this and this, and there was a hand grabbed the back of my shirt and pulled me out of that doorway that four of us were trying to stand in, and I was taken out in the hall and said, all right, stop talking about what you just did.
Right.
Help us figure out what we need to do. Help us with these cameras. Help us. Give us the guy, you know, I told them who, you know, I was the safety team leader, and they're like, help us figure out what we need to do, but stop talking about what you just did.
Right. And I'm guessing that was legal protection, basically.
Yes, yes. He's like, you know, he says, yes, we all have cameras on. He says, but, you know, 4 different people are going to say 4 different things of what you just said.
Right.
I'm like, okay, fine. Yep. I remember that from, you know, all the training we've had with dealing with these type of situations.
Yeah.
So, and actually, as we're out in the hall, away from that room, before long, there was 4 officers there. And, you know, my immediate thought was, well, by that time, I think by that time I had been outside and seen my family.
Right.
And I ran back inside from them because as I was talking to my family, my wife noticed smoke near the building. And I thought it was smoke coming out of the eaves, so I thought maybe there'd been some damage and there was a fire in the attic or something. It was actually on the other side of the building from where we were, the truck was on fire.
Oh.
But I had run back in to, you know, say, hey, we got a fire or something, and that's when they said, no, it was the truck. And I looked and, okay, yeah, all right. I didn't make it back out to see my family again.
Right.
Somewhere in there, you know, and I think we ended up in this security monitor room. But as I ended up out in the hallway talking with that first officer, there ended up being 4 of them there. And I had already told my wife, I says, I'm probably going to get arrested. I don't know how long this is going to take, you know, but be
prepared.
Be prepared. I'm probably going to go to jail for a while. And I knew that, you know, there was a couple hundred people outside the door, and most of the while, you know, I says, hey, when you guys arrest me and take me out of here, you know, can we not go in front of the whole crowd? And the one cop in some very colorful language says, you're not getting arrested, you're a hero. And so I'm like, well, okay, well, I'm glad you think that, but, you know, I don't still, you know, legal, you know, I don't know why I thought of that at the time, but, you know.
Well, and that is something that is always instilled, like, when you go for your CPL, that's one of the first things they tell you. If you're ever in an incident, 99% of the time, you're going to get arrested.
Yeah.
And be prepared for that.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. So, and that's why it's very, very important to have a legal defense readily available.
Right.
And I had, I know very, very shortly after it happened, I did call USCCA and let them know what was going on, and they were going to get a lawyer in contact with me and get the ball rolling on that. Like I said, I made several phone calls I received several phone calls from people. I made a phone call to my employer because the person who I answer to, I've been working with for 18 years, and she's a worrier. And I knew as soon as she saw that on the news, she would have known it was my church, and she'd have been worried sick. So I actually called her too, and I says, "You're going to see some stuff on the news. My church was just attacked. I was involved in a shooting, and I don't know what's going to happen, if I'm going to go to jail, but if you don't, I says, I know you're going to hear it, so I'm just letting you know." And she was like, okay. But no, law enforcement was super to us. I'm sorry I didn't get all the way through that.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Let's go on to that. What your next question was you asked, but.
Yeah, before I do, interestingly enough, my parents, my father and stepmother live in Missouri. My mother and stepfather live in Rhode Island. My dad and stepmom, they've been to this church. I got married at this church, so they knew this church, but apparently they didn't know the name. I got calls from both of them asking me, because they all know I'm on a safety team. They said, "Was that your church?" Blah, blah. So they saw it on the news. So you're not the only one that has people that,
Yeah, but no, everybody was super. At one point, they were asking me and the other fellow that were engaged, "You guys all right? You need to be checked out." And the other fella, he, a little bit older than me, and he'd had some heart issues where he's like, "Well, yeah, I could, well, I guess, So they sat him down and they asked me, "Did you get checked out yet?" I'm like, "No." I said, "I'm fine." We're going to check you anyways, So he sat down in a chair and I sat down in a chair right there in the lobby. And first thing was there was like 6 firemen lined up in front of me, and then just shook my hands before they were, anything happened, and afterwards, as I talked to them at various events, in the time not long after that, they were like, one of them said, "Thank you for saving them from walking into a really horrific situation," because you think about it, that law enforcement, that fire department, what it must be to walk into a scene where there had been, a mass shooting and stuff, and they're like, "Thank you for saving us from that," So they thought about it,
And that's an interesting perspective. That's not something you normally would think.
Yeah, you wouldn't think about it. I ran into several weeks later and went an event in downtown Wayne, and one of the firemen said that to me, paramedics.
Yeah, so no, what I was asking is, how long did it take for you to emotionally process, what exactly actually happened? Because I know when you have, a burst of adrenaline, you're not really thinking about all different aspects. How long was it before it clicked? What just took place?
I think it was pretty immediate that, what had just happened, what I had just done. I think it was more the uncertainty of why.
Right.
Why did this happen? Why did this happen here?
Yeah.
I calmed down and there was so much activity. I wasn't sure what to do afterwards. I was like, I'll keep a low profile. And so the next day, the next morning, first thing, we all went back about 10:30 that night. It was that late before they released the scene.
Yeah.
And, everybody had run out of the building, purses, wallets. We couldn't get our cars because they had evacuated the whole piece of property.
Right.
So we went back and, there was an hour of process in seeing the church family that night. That was, I think that was the good start of the healing. Just everybody being able to go back up there and see each other.
So the healing really started that later that night.
It did for me because I got to see people and I knew everybody. I knew nobody got hurt.
Right.
But it was just to see people.
Yeah.
To see those people that care so much about.
Do you? This isn't in my questions, but I'm curious. Do you think that your congregation having all kind of gone through this together, do you think that strengthened the bond? Because with smaller churches, like you said, everybody knows everybody, and for the most part, you're friendly. Do you think it made that stronger having had gone through this all together?
I believe to a certain extent with some people, yeah. I mean, there's randomly I'll be standing out there and just get a hug,
Right.
from somebody I don't normally, it's not, that way with. And there's still people that, tell me, they say they turn around and they see me standing there in that spot where I'm usually standing, and it brings them peace, so, but they've also told us that, said that, she also said she turned around and I wasn't there one day and it made her anxious. So, but it's definitely built a bond with certain people, especially our team,
Yeah.
is really, and the fellas who we were involved with. But I do think it's something that we have all lived through together.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was, you wouldn't think that the bond could be much stronger than, if you've known these people for so long. I realized this past year that it's like, I remember when that kid, when that girl was a baby, or that kid was a baby, and we're hanging out at their graduation party. I'm like,
Right.
I've known these people. These are like my kids,
Yeah.
I've known them for so long, I've known these people forever now, it seems like. So, there's, I think, and we had some families leave afterwards. We've had some people start attending afterwards.
Right.
They're like, if evil has to go to that level to attack this church, there must be something good happening here. So, no, there's definitely a good bond there.
Well, and I think there's something also to be said for the fact that evil was stopped before it even stepped foot through the door versus another church like, in Grand Blanc where it made it all the way in the doors.
And I've had a thought on that, and I don't know if it's, I'm definitely not a biblical scholar. But the thought has gone through my mind. Events like ours don't typically end the way they do.
Right.
Very seldom do they end the way they do.
Yeah.
And after our event, it seemed to be a dramatic increase in the longing for information and the development of church safety seemed to explode this past year.
Right. Well, and you and I had talked about that a little bit when you came out for the one that I had set up through USCCA.
Yep.
You said that you had been to a few others and the groups were a lot larger, and even the first one that we did prior to the one you were there, I was surprised at how many people showed up, because usually you would think there'd maybe be a handful, 10, 20 at the most. We had, 5, 10 at the most. We had, I forget what it was, I want to say it was close to 50 people, I think, at the first one. The second one was a bit smaller, but a little more time had gone on.
As the from what I was told, the Protect Your House of Worship class we attended was the first one that USCCA had done in the East region.
Right.
And there might have been 15 or 10 or 15 people there.
Yeah.
Three members from our safety team were there. All three of us were involved in this incident. Two of us engaged him, and the other fellow was the one who was hit in the leg. And the instructor of that class, several weeks later, they offered that class out in the New Hudson area there. And I talked with them, and they gave it twice that day, and they had pretty good attendance. Actually, one of the fellows from our team, the fellow who'd been hit in the leg, went with some other people he knew from other churches.
Yeah.
And they sat in that class. And then I got off work and snuck in after the class had started. And then that class was being offered a lot after that.
Yeah.
And they would be full. I would sneak in, and those classes would be full. And so the thought had crossed my mind, and I don't know if that's it, but with us winning that battle of good and evil, was it meant as an inspiration so that if you put a team together and you train and you put the effort forth, you can win this battle.
Right.
Because it's not going to get any better. And we saw how many incidents there was after ours.
Yeah.
Very quickly. So I'm like, was our event meant to
Be that inspiration.
strengthen the fortification for the churches?
Right.
Just our event, to see how things went, how people who weren't normally where they would be that day,
Yeah.
how it wasn't a normal Sunday, we didn't have Sunday school that morning, how the deacon came late because he didn't have to be there before Sunday school to bring donuts that day,
Yeah.
and how my fellow team member, had, decided to mic up late. He and his wife were actually on the way to church, and she decided she wasn't feeling well, so she didn't come that day.
Right.
So he decided he'd mic up and go on security, and just how God placed us in just the right spot to be able to fight that evil.
Right.
We were just everybody, Richard right there and John right there. And, I was standing in the spot I was always at.
Yeah.
But, just how we, so many things, the kids were just coming off of the stage, and it was a little bit later than they normally would have been dismissed. And, they would have been walking through that lobby, so many things. God's hands were in so many things in the preparation for that, and the just how many years we'd been building to that day.
Yeah. What would you say is the most misunderstood aspect of what it's like to face a deadly threat in a church setting or church atmosphere like the one you faced?
I don't know. I never really thought of it. I think our biggest thing was we had never considered that happening the way it did.
Right.
That's a difficult question to answer because I've never really considered that. It's I don't know how to answer that question. To be honest with you.
That's fair. I mean, not all the questions have answers.
What you've heard today is what happened in the moment, the decisions, the pressure, the response. But incidents like this don't end when the scene is secured. In episode 3, we're going to talk about the aftermath, the emotional toll, the impact on the church, the lessons learned, and what changed moving forward. because response is only part of the story. Recovery matters just as much. Join us next week as we unpack what happens after the crisis and what every church safety team needs to understand about the days and months that follow. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Sanctuary Peacemakers. If today's conversation added value, be sure to tune in next week as we continue equipping and encouraging those who serve and protect houses of worship. A special thanks to Haley Jones for granting permission to use her song Not Today in our introduction, and to Lesley Jones for allowing us to use the song Sound Mind as our outro music. As always, y'all stay safe and y'all stay blessed.